of the Marshall City Council to order with the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
I'd move to approve the agenda as written.
Motion by Steve, seconded by Jim to proceed with the agenda as presented. Any discussion on that? If not, we'll move to a vote.
Did yours show up?
Mm-hmm.
Well, how come I don't find mine? It's not letting me vote. Have you joined the meeting? There it is, yep. It's down at the bottom of the page.
Okay, that motion passes. We'll proceed then to agenda item number 3. Agenda item number 3 is consider the approval of the minutes of the regular City Council meeting that was held on October 24th. The Council does have the minutes of that meeting. Are there any corrections to note?
I move approval.
Second.
Motion by Craig, seconded by Steve to approve the minutes as they have been presented. We'll move to a vote. Motion passes. We'll note the abstention. Agenda item number 4. Agenda item number 4, this is a public hearing for the ice and snow removal and weed elimination from the private property. So we'll conduct a public hearing, and then following on the assessment of the cost for this, and then following the public hearing, then we'll consider the resolution. Glenn, do you have this? Jane? I'll call on Jane DeBreeze, who is our city clerk, to introduce and conduct this public hearing.
Thank you. At the last meeting, a resolution was adopted calling for the public hearing. Everyone that is proposed to be assessed was received a notice of the public hearing date, what their assessment was going to be, and what it was for. We did not receive any objections in writing from anybody. So if there is no issues tonight, we can adopt the resolution. It will be added to their taxes, and it will be a 1-year assessment only.
Is anyone here this evening to speak as part of this public hearing? Are there any questions from the council as part of the public hearing? Steve?
If somebody would want to pay it, whatever their assessment is, right off the get-go without having it on their taxes, Jane, could they?
Up to a certain date, and I'm not sure what that date is.
But the answer is yes, they could.
I believe it was November 30th is in the resolution. It could be paid in full by that date.
Yeah, I don't have the resolution.
By the end of this month.
Yeah, that's month, correct.
Any other questions, John?
I'm just wondering, not sure who to direct it to, but are any of the properties listed delinquent in any of their taxes, or is something that's been accumulating?
Some of them could possibly be.
Yeah, I know at least one is.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm thinking so.
Is that by chance a vacant?
No.
That's not an abandoned?
No.
Okay.
Any other questions from the council as part of the public hearing?
How's the calculation made?
I'll have you come up, and then Jane, maybe if you prepared to answer that. So this, as Dr. Afhalter is coming up, we do need to have everybody use the microphone because this is being broadcast then live on cable access television. Dr. Afhalter.
How is the calculation made for the fees that are being charged for snow removal?
Yep. So Glenn, do you want to start with that?
Sure, I could start with that. We hire it done. We take the dollar amount that the contractor bills us for it, and then there's an administrative fee put on by administration. Those are the only fees.
So what would a typical fee be that was going to go on the stipend for the assessments then?
Do you have those?
So Jane, do you want to give that example?
the resolution indicates the dollar amount that's to be assessed for each individual property. We take the amount that it cost the city to have the removal done. We add an administration fee based on our fee resolution, and they are sent a bill. Every month, on the bill, it states that every month that it is not paid, interest will be added on the unpaid balance. So every month we add additional interest, but we do not mail out new statements. That's not cost justified. Once we get to the point where the time limit is up, we take that dollar amount that the bill is and add additional interest if it's assessed at 3.87%, which is what was adopted for all the special assessments for this year. And that is what will be added to their tax statement.
So the amount that is being assessed, it ranges from just over $90 to just over $101 for 5 properties for snow removal and actually for 7 properties for snow removal, 8 properties, and then 2 for lawn mowing, and that was $82
Yep.
per property. So, does that answer your question?
Well, somewhat. Is there a fee addressed for putting it onto the assessment roll too then?
There's as part of what Jane said, there's an administrative fee.
This amount plus, will be added to the assessment roll, and we'll have interest at 3.87%
But
for the year.
is there a fee in addition?
I don't know what the county charges us for a fee to put things on the assessment roll. I'm thinking there is, and I don't know who bears that cost.
So what you shared with me is not ready for publication then?
I don't have access to that because I don't do that portion of it.
Well, you just threw out a fee that one day, so I was just curious about it. If
The
that
admin
goes-
fee is $50.
Oh,
That's what you're looking for?
That's what I was looking for.
Okay. The administration fee that we add to the cost of the bill is $50. That's based on our fee resolution. Okay?
Well, yes, the public that's sitting out there really needs to know the penalties for not doing their snow removal. But I think there's something more seriously involved in this snow removal thing, and I'm going to share it as long as I've got the floor. I had a neighbor who, it was almost a week and nothing was done to his snow removal. And so I thought, well, I'm young enough, I can go down there and do it for him. So I knocked on the door, and he finally came to the door with his oxygen tank. And normally he would have his sidewalk cleaned up pronto, but I didn't want to put him, I was telling Glenn, complain about his snow. So when we talked, and I finally opened up and got his snowblower out and cleaned it. Now, as neighbors and citizens, there are times that I have heard, in the case he hadn't been out of this house for a week, he was shy enough or didn't feel he could call anybody or even his own family. And I've heard of people who have had an occasion that they have succumbed to something laying on their kitchen floor and could not get up to even make a phone call. So I think it's behoving us, if we see something that's not shoveled, to find out why it isn't instead of just reporting it. Go to that house as a neighbor or as a friend and knock on the door, and who knows, he might be laying there for hours or days. And we're concerned about this fee for cleaning the sidewalk. In our neighborhood, if we don't, somebody else cleans, I mean, we go up and down the block and everything gets done. It might not be that way. But the knowledge of what the expenses involved, if you don't clean it, is the one thing I wanted to bring out, but also bring out what our citizens' responsibilities are for who might be not shoveling their walk. So thank you for the time.
Yep, good comment. Any other questions the council has as part of the public hearing? If not, is there a motion to close the public hearing?
So moved.
Motion by
Second.
Steve, seconded by John. Discussion? If not, we'll move to a vote. Motion passes. Just a quick recognition. Thank you, Jane, for conducting that public hearing. This probably will be your last public hearing that you'll conduct as you're retiring at the end of the month, so congratulations. We'll now consider the resolution that would adopt the assessment for the ice and snow removal and weed elimination.
I move the resolution.
Motion by Craig,
Second.
Seconded by Steve. Discussion? If not, we'll move to a vote. Motion passes. Agenda item number 5. Agenda item number 5, consider the award of the proposal for snow removal for services at Tallgrass Liquor and the Merit Center for 2017 and 2018 through the 2019 winter seasons. Glenn?
Thank you, Mayor and Council. You can see we got 2 bids for the work to be done at the two sites, and we're recommending 2 different contractors for the 2 different sites, and we would recommend the approval of the snow removal services at Merit Center to Andrew DeSayer, a marshal, and at the liquor store to Action. It's the Action Business. Yep.
Are there any questions on the recommendation? If not, we'll take these one at a time. First, I'll entertain a motion on the proposal for the snow removal at the Merit Center to be awarded to Andrew DeSayer.
Move approval?
Second.
Motion by Craig, seconded by Steve. Discussion?
I have a quick question.
And then, Jim, and then Glenn.
We have staff, we have equipment, staff. Why are we contracting out services at city-owned buildings?
Because of the timing involved with doing the work. So, for instance, the liquor store. Liquor store needs to have it done by a certain time. We're doing streets. The street department's doing streets and alleys. Parks department's doing parks. So this is if we want to hire more people to do it by the time it's necessary, we could do that as well. We've hired this in the past, and it's worked out, I think, fairly well for both of us.
And Glenn.
Just 2 questions here. One, I assume that the costs then come out of the budgets of these 2 entities then?
They do.
Okay. And as far as the bidders are concerned, they're okay with splitting it. There was no problem. They don't assume they're going to get the bid for the whole thing.
No.
They know
It was
they might
clearly
just get...
stated in the call for bids as well.
Okay, thank you.
Any other discussion? Steve?
The question I have kind of piggybacks on Councilmember Lazinski's. Glenn, when you say that your city's doing the streets and the parks is doing the parks, what doesn't the Red Baron and the Merit Center? Well, the Merit Center would fall on the parks, but
Right.
don't they have vehicles out there that they can use?
Not that I'm aware of. The Merit Center?
Or liquor store. Is
No.
there a
No,
is
not
there
to the
city?
park.
Is there a city-owned pickup truck with a plow on it that he could use to?
No.
That Scott could use to plow.
They're all being used at that
They're
time.
usually doing alleys and
Yeah.
Okay.
It
Other
is
discussion on the
probably
motion?
a bit cheaper to do it this way.
Well, if it's cheaper to do it this way, then how come we don't contract out the parks and
We
the
may,
other?
we may have to do that.
Because if this is
eventually,
cheaper,
so-
it would make sense to
Right.
buy less vehicles and contract it all out.
That's right. We may have to do that at some point in time. And if Parks was here to respond to that, that would be good.
Because then the other question I had is,
Because
you
we
said
have
there,
plow trucks on.
is they're
that
doing
do
the
that.
park. I'm looking at this equipment that we purchased. Is the parks could be done after these parking lots are done? Because these 2 parking lots are probably take an hour and a half each, and they'd be done, if that long even.
I think the park's responsibility is not just the parks, so it's alleys, I think is that.
right.
Alleys, parks, parking lots.
The library.
But, well, yeah, the library, correct.
And then also there's been discussion about the street side of the bus stops being open. The property owners clear the sidewalks and they clear around the bus stop kiosk, but the discussion has been to have the Parks Department remove the snow where the buses turn in to go to the bus pickup kiosks. So they've got a pretty full slate.
Yeah.
Okay, other discussion on the motion?
Just, as far as the liquor store is concerned, then the 3 days, Thanksgiving Day, Christmas Day, and Easter, are the only days that they're closed.
As far as I know, you asked
That'd be
someone
correct.
from the liquor store.
So they do need it all the other days then.
Yep.
Other discussion on the motion? If not, we'll move to a vote on motion number 1. Motion passes. And then the second action would be the proposal for snow removal services at tall grass, that would be the recommendation to Action Company LLC of Marshall.
I'll make that motion.
Second.
Motion by John, seconded by Craig. Discussion? If not, we'll move to a vote. Motion passes. Agenda item number 6. Agenda item number 6 is the municipal building project. Consider the award of proposals for the architect engineering services. I'll call on Glenn Olson, Director of Public Works, City Engineer.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. The City Hall Committee that has met over the last several months really culminated with this meeting concerning the presentations by the 3 firms that were invited to present. It was not an open presentation for anyone to apply. It was done by invitation. And there were 3 then that were invited to make presentations. They were given the same amount of time. They were given they were providing proposals to the entire committee. They had a verbal presentation and a ranking scoring based upon certain criteria with certain scores for each thing. After that was done, the scores were put together and a ranking sheet, first, second, or third, in the interpretation of each person on the committee. Those rankings then were also summarized and a first, second, and third ranking made. The fee structure was to be opened only after a selection was made based upon performance evaluations. And if in fact the presentations or the scores were fairly close, it is recommended that you check both of them. In this case, there were 2 close performers or selected, and so 2 of the financial proposals were open, and they happened to be in the same order of the selection for the performance-based selection. So after that was done, we are recommending the consultant services to Engen Associates of Wilmer, Minnesota. And if in fact that's approved, we will be bringing contracts back to the council for review.
Okay, thank you, Glenn. We had 3 members of the council that served on this committee, council members Vera Kohler, Sturrock, and then John DeKramer served as the chair. So John or any other members of the committee, do you have any additional comments you want to make?
I guess, first of all, we had 3 good proposals that came to us. So I think we had a good choice to go through. The one comment I do want to make regarding Engen, if those of you who may have looked at the proposal, part of their first recommendation was to remove both buildings. We recommend them as the people doing the architect work, not because of that proposal, but because of a number of the concepts and a few other things that were part of the scoring process. I don't want to say at this point that we chose it with the thought in mind of demoing both buildings. That certainly isn't the case. And it was just that in going through the proposals, which again, Glenn Olson had a scoring procedure that was quite well defined, very well spread out, and going through the process, Engen was the company that scored the highest, and in turn, by a very small amount, it was also the lowest cost. So that's about it.
Okay, thank you, John. Any other comments or questions?
I have 3 comments. One is I was disappointed that we didn't open all 3 bids. I think if a firm goes to the trouble of presenting something to us and submitting a bid, we should be respectful enough of them to open their bid. And like I said, I felt bad that they made a presentation, and I think John just kind of mentioned that all three firms are qualified. If they're all qualified, why wouldn't we want to open up their bid? And I firmly believe that when you make decisions like that, you should have all the facts before you. And I was disappointed that we were told that we were not supposed to open all three bids. The second comment I would make is that my concern, and one of the concerns of the community members, was this. There were 11 people on that committee. Of the 11 members of that committee, 6 of them were city staff members, which means city staff had the majority of the votes on what took place. And that seems like a lot of power to invest in city staff. And I don't recall other committees where city staff has the deciding votes. And I hope as we move forward that proportion of votes does not stay that way. I think we only had 2 members of the community on the committee, and we had 3 city council members, but we had 6 city staff. And certainly the city staff could have influenced the outcome because they, again, had the majority of the votes. And so I would recommend that in the future, the committee that goes forward have a more proportionate representation on that board, and that it not be weighed heavily in favor of city staff. John mentioned this too about the firm that was recommended. And I guess my concern was right off the bat, they were recommending that we tear down our existing city hall and build a new city hall from scratch. Even, this is according to their numbers. According to their numbers, and let me just get a drink here. These are their numbers, not mine. According to their numbers, their estimates at this time, it would cost $1.3 million more to build a new city hall than to remodel the existing one. That's a 29% increase in the budget. And I hope that whoever's on the committee will certainly look at those numbers and consider what is the best use of taxpayers' dollars. And if we can get a fully functional city hall and save $1.3 million, I think that would be beneficial to the taxpayers. So I think all of us, at least I have the feeling that sometimes architects get carried away with their designs and what their costs. And I hope that who's ever on that committee will try and help hold down the architects and their designs so that they come up with designs that are functional and common sense designs and that are not a waste of taxpayer dollars. So those are my comments.
Thank you, Glenn. Other questions, or Steve?
I guess I must have missed has there been any discussion of why we're building in the same spot as opposed to some of the other options that we looked at, I guess?
I think the committee did have a discussion about that.
Yeah, that was actually quite a bit of discussion in our committees.
Sure, but did it come back to council?
Really, it came back as the recommendation you're seeing now. So I guess that's really the recommendation is that we do stay in the same location.
And why is that? Is it more cost effective?
Yeah, I would say primarily more cost effective. We own 2 buildings, adjacent buildings on that location now. In order to, I guess, cost effectively do anything with them, we'd either have to remodel it in order to make it saleable for somebody, or the value to a commercial or some other individual in the condition they're at now would be considerably less. So when we took that into account, along with then the cost of either acquiring a land or acquiring some other site, that really became, I would say, cost prohibitive at that point.
Thank you.
Other questions or discussion?
Just one other comment I'd like to make. It was my comments to the committee, along with thanking them for all the work that they did do, was that if this recommendation is accepted, and unless the council has no other requests from this committee, that this committee would be dissolved. and basically we handle it as we see fit for the rest of the project. So there was really no intent of keeping this committee through the entire process. So the function and the direction that we had at that point, we feel we've completed with this recommendation, and assuming this passes, that committee would be dissolved unless the council has some desire to keep it intact.
Okay. Thank you, John. So you had the recommendation for the proposal for the architect engineering services. What are the wishes of the council?
I'll move approval of the recommendation as submitted by the committee.
I would second.
Motion by David, seconded by John. Discussion.
I would just add one fact here, and that John mentioned too that he felt that all the firms were qualified firms, and in the preference poll, certainly the architectural firm that was selected ranked number one. But after the bids were opened, it was also determined that they had the low bid too, and so there was, I believe, around $20,000 savings in the cost of the architect by going with this particular firm. So I think that's something that people should know about too.
Thank you, Glenn. Any other discussion on the motion?
Mr. Mayor, I would reflect Glenn's comment on the makeup of the committee. I think when you have city staff making the decisions, kind of the hen watching or the fox watching the hen house. So I think I agree with the next committee. We should have more of a community predominance on there. Thank you.
Other discussion on the motion? If not, we'll move to a vote. Motion passes. Agenda item number 7. Agenda item number 7 is the consent agenda. We'll bring the items on the consent agenda up to the screen.
Very small agenda.
Cozy.
I want them all moved. No pressure, Kyle.
Is Louis okay, or do you want me to just read one? Okay, so on the consent agenda this evening, and I'll read through these. Consider the second amendment for the contract for deed regarding the, I'm losing the, I don't have full screen here though.
Ralco.
Okay, so number 8 would be consider the approval of the contract for deed extension regarding the Ralco property on, there we go, okay, located on North 8th Street. Consider the approval of the engagement letter with Van Iwarden Associates for the actuarial valuation for the post-employment benefits. Consider the adoption of the resolution designating the polling locations. Consider the resolution authorizing the transfer and closure of the capital fund, project fund 498. Consider the approval of the farm lease agreements. Consider the authorization to declare bikes as surplus property for the police department. Consider the application for the exempt permit for Avera Marshall for an event December 22nd, 2017, and consider the approval of the bills and the project payment. So is there any item on the consent agenda any member of the council wants removed for purpose of a separate discussion?
Mr. Mayor, I'd move to approve the consent agenda as written.
Hold on just a second.
Number 8.
Glenn has requested number 8. Any other item? If not, Steve, I'll turn back to you for your motion.
With the exception of number 8, I move to approve the consent agenda otherwise as written.
Second.
Motion by Steve, seconded by David. Discussion? If not, we'll move to a vote. Motion passes. We'll now move to agenda item number 15, which was agenda item number 8. Glenn, you have a question?
I just have a quick question on the amendment to the contract for deed. It says final payment will be due the earlier of November 15th, 2018, or upon the day the seller vacates the premises. So even if they don't vacate the premises on November 15th, we're going to have to pay it, even though we can't use it.
You don't have the full use of the entirety of the building. You have full use of half of it right now. And that's why it has been extended. This will be the second extension. They have not vacated. And who knows, we may be back here a year from now if they have not vacated. But that does say you are correct. If they do not vacate, final payment is due on that.
And we would have access to the entire building on that time, too,
Yeah.
regardless of if it was vacated or not.
Right.
Okay. You're saying we'd have access to the entire building even though they don't vacate it?
Yes.
Yes, that's the way that the contract would read.
Yeah.
So in reality, if they're not out of there, they would request another extension.
My concern is if they're still in there and we make the final payment,
If
there's
they're still in there,
no reason
we would,
for them to leave.
Right. If they're still in there, we would request an extension.
Oh, and
Yeah.
but that would be contingent upon them agreeing to the extension.
Right. They
Well,
have.
otherwise, we'd have to kick them out.
Right.
And right now, we
I
have.
just want to make sure that
we have requested extension, and
right.
it has been granted.
Okay. And I think in this situation, the seller is working with us as best they can, and they've been very reasonable, and we've been reasonable, and so fair. Okay. Thank you.
Very good. Any other questions? If not, I'd entertain a motion.
So move.
Motion by Craig,
Second.
second by Steve. Discussion? If not, we'll move to a vote. Motion passes. Agenda item number 16. Agenda item number 16 is consider the recommendation to approve and execute a food services agreement between the City of Marshall and Marshall Area Hockey Association, a Minnesota nonprofit corporation, the MAHA Group. So with that, I'll call on Darren Rahm, who has been working with this. Darren is with the Convention and Visitors Bureau. Darren?
Thank you, Mayor and Council. Does everybody have a updated sheet from your last
The
changes?
red-lined
Yep.
version that went out today was submitted.
Does anybody that doesn't have that? Okay. So you have before you tonight a food services agreement between the city and the Marshall Amateur Hockey Association. And I'm willing to entertain questions if anybody has any questions on the agreement.
Other questions?
I guess I was concerned one thing, we had this sent to us at kind of the last minute, and it'd be nice to get these things earlier so we have a chance to read through them ahead of time.
You had the food service agreement. There were a couple of suggestions that came in with the
Changes, yeah. And it was those changes that I didn't see, and all of a sudden there were 3 documents when before there was 1, so, yeah.
Well, the
guess
3
that's
documents
on
are
me
red.
because I'm the one that asked for the changes.
Okay.
Yeah, very,
Okay.
And the changes, the only change was the word food to concessions. So nothing else changed, if I'm not mistaken.
I guess my concern is we're basically letting them operate in the facility free of charge. And normally, I don't know that we offer organizations the use of city property like this free of charge. And in cases like this, oftentimes they'll have a deposit. You put down a deposit. If something's not right, you lose your deposit. Here, I don't think there's a deposit. Second of all, they are using city equipment and city facilities, and when they use city equipment, it wears out. And if it's not working, city is required to fix it. So we might incur expenses but not get reimbursed for anything. And what I'm wondering is, why couldn't we charge them some rental charge? And I know it's their first year of operation and there are uncertainties, but maybe an arrangement could be made where we get a certain percentage of the profits. If they make a certain amount of money, we get 10, 20% of the profits, or a set fee where we charge them per hour, per day. And if they find out that they're not making money, it's a hardship for them, they certainly could come back to the city and we could rewrite the contract, but it just seems like the city should be charging something. This organization is going to be making profits, we hope, off of the use of the facilities. And I looked at other school districts and other entities, and they charge a certain amount per day, per hour for the use of their facilities. Here's one for concession stand. They charge something like $100 a day to use it. And so I feel like it's not unreasonable for the city to charge something because, again, it's wear and tear. We've got new equipment, and it's expensive equipment. And I realize there's uncertainties as to how much profit, but an arrangement could be made where we get a certain percentage of the profits or at least get a certain amount per day or per hour. And if it turns out that it's an unreasonable, it's an amount that they can't make a profit on, then they could come back and renegotiate it with us.
Mr. Mayor?
Right.
Can I address that? Is it all right, Darren?
Sure.
Sorry if I addressed. Thank you. Glenn, those are great points, and that's all been a discussion part. The first year that this was open, it was done under a contract with another food service. Because of our agreements and the type of food that's being vended there, this isn't what I would consider a typical concession stand. This is more of a food service area that would be similar to any one of the vendors at XL or any of the other stadiums. That's the quality that the people that we're associated with at the arena as primary sponsors. That's our agreement with as the city. So the original group that ran it, and you can question as to what their operational overhead was, they claim to have not made money. And I think that's probably fairly reasonable that they didn't make a profit. You could argue about why that is, but Marshall Amateur Hockey Association was a little bit leery, and this isn't the same as when they ran the concession stand at the former Lockwoods Arena. And so this first year is a consideration to them to get their feet on the ground. After that, it is a 5% back to the city. So it's the first year out to get them on their feet on the ground and for us to get a handle on how this thing is going to work. I think Darren's done a good job of negotiating this. I think that Dennis Simpson has done a good job of working this contract over. I read it. I had some concerns, discussed it with them. I think they fixed it. I think that this is a good faith effort. The Maha is a good tenant for us. They're our primary renter. And I think that when you look at the whole revenue package and what they bring to that arena, I think us giving them that 5% the first year is a pretty small tribute that we're giving them to get their feet on the ground.
Glenn, I'll address some of your concerns. I've spent the better part of since February when Chartwell's didn't want to sign an extension to their agreement. We started looking through other potential vendors, and we really exhausted all our avenues. We tried initially to find somebody to run the concessions for the baseball softball complex. We couldn't find anybody to do that under the current contract, and it ended up Scott Vandermill and myself running concessions at the baseball softball park. We visited with a lot of companies locally with this typical service agreement, and we really couldn't find anybody that wanted to do it. Maha stepped forward and said, we understand what the Red Baron Arena and Expo means to the community, and we're willing to step up and do it with, like you said, a lot of the great unknowns going into the first year. And they take genuine pride in making sure that everybody has a good experience out there. And I think it helps having those familiar faces in there. When you walk up to the concession stand previously, there wasn't that vested interest in making sure the facility was top-notch. So I think we have that with Maha. In my discussions with Maha, they would not have agreed to do this had there been that percentage in the first year, just due to the too many unknowns.
So during the first year then, will they provide any kind of financial information as to their sales and so forth, so that in the future the city council can make decisions as to what's an appropriate amount to charge for the facility and the equipment?
I don't believe that's outlined in the contract, and I don't know if that's, we'll know if they did a good job, if they want to, or if they had a successful year, if they want to re-enter into this contract. And
I think you talked about a commission. So yeah. The commission is based on gross sales then, or?
Yes, it is. 5% of gross.
And in that case, if that were the case in the future, they would have to show us what the gross sales are. Otherwise, we wouldn't know what the commission should be.
Correct.
So I would assume in the first year
Sales is one side of it, their costs and stuff that goes into, that sales is just one side of it. So we may not know how profitable they are.
In that case, it would be good to look at their entire financial statements as far as, so we can determine profit. If the commission is too high, then
If
the
you want to
profit.
ask and they're willing to show it, then we can go down that road. But
But I think before we make decisions on rent and whether it's too high or too low, I think it's important for us to see what their profitability is on these.
And I hate to think where we'd be at right now if they hadn't stepped up to do this. We had a very successful tournament last weekend. We had teams from Fargo, Woodbury, Mound West Tonka, Rochester. I couldn't have done concessions last weekend. So we're very lucky to have them.
And we did discuss that, Glenn. That's the last alternative. Hire additional city staff. Bust the budget to get somebody running it.
Sure.
So.
And I appreciate the idea that if there are profits to be made, I'd like to see them locally and not to some company from outside of Marshall coming in and making the profit. So I like that idea. I guess my whole point is that I feel like we're offering something to them, and even if it's a small amount that they pay us, it's the principle of the thing that they should be able to pay us something for the use of the facilities. And it may not be a huge amount to start with, but I feel it should be something.
As we keep talking about profits, one has to remember Maha is a nonprofit. So I believe their financials are all,
They are.
you can Google them and it's public knowledge.
The other piece that I'd like to add to this, and I apologize, Doc Meister, for running in front of you here, but thank you. And I won't go for surgery for a while. When the Lockwood Arena sold, there was a substantial amount of that revenue that was owned by the Maha, and that was returned back to the city as part of the agreement to go into the Red Baron Arena. Granted, they're very happy to be in there. So, this isn't a one-way street. This has been a two-way street. They are our primary tenant out there. And so they're stepping up to make sure that, as Darren said, that this is a good experience for all the people, including our parents and fans, but also for the visiting teams. I know how hard Darren worked. Trust me, I was in his office, and I've leaned on him pretty hard since we first started out there about getting this concession thing fixed, and I think he's got a good equitable piece here, and I want to thank him for doing this, and I'm really hopeful that this works out for Maha, that this is a long and living agreement, and that we can get either them or a similar group to take the ball fields in the summer.
And the other point is that this is an organization that's good to have invested in the success of this facility with the volunteer effort that will go forth to provide the labor for the concession sales.
On that, Glenn, you make good points, but the facts are A, the company that did it before pulled out. B, we couldn't find anybody to do it. C, Maha steps up, and they are nonprofit, all volunteer. We're going to get something from them if they do well this year and decide to go on. And the final thing, without concessions, could you imagine how many tournaments would be held in the future going on? People would come, and that would be the last time they come. And so the money lost by not doing this, in my opinion, fully outweighs anything that we're going to get or lose from Maha not paying us in the first year. So I'm going to vote in favor of this.
Just a comment related to what Jim said here. There's a difference between the whole nonprofit organization and their concession operations. Because there's other expenses and items involved in operating Maha that are not related to the concession. What I'm concerned about is what their profitability is with regard to the concession by itself. I'm not looking for their other operations. And what we want to know is what they're doing with the concessions. Are they making money or losing money? If they're making money, how much are they making? And as far as their other operations, that's not what I'm concerned about, because we're dealing with this specific issue of what to do about the concession stand. So that's That's where I'd like to see what the revenue is for the concession stands and their expenses and how much profit they're making. That's what I would like to see, not related necessarily to their other operations, because they are a nonprofit and they're using it for a good purpose. But they have other sources of revenues and other expenditures that are unrelated to the concession stand.
Okay, good discussion. Is there any other points to be made that haven't been made so far? If not, I'd entertain a motion on the
I so
recommendation.
move.
Motion by Craig,
Second.
seconded by Steve. Discussion? If not, we'll move to a vote. Motion passes. Agenda item number 17. Agenda item number 17 is to consider the request of the Islamic Society of Marshall for a variance adjustment permit to provide less parking than required by city ordinance at a location at 110 South 10th Street. So with that, Dennis, I believe you're going to start with this presentation.
It starts with a variance request from Glenn's office.
Yeah, I was just saying, because Glenn pointed at you, I thought. But go ahead, Glenn.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. This was a variance request from the Islamic Society for a reduction of required off-street parking. The staff reviewed it, and one of the considerations for the recommendation is that there's a practical difficulty in providing any more parking off-street on the site, maybe a couple of spots. So the recommendation to the Planning Commission was to approve the variance for 16 parking spaces in lieu of 32 required by our ordinance, not building code, but by ordinance. So that was recommended to the Planning Commission. After review by the Planning Commission, the recommendation from the Planning Commission was to deny the variance due to safety concerns. So that's what's coming to the council, is the recommendation from the Planning Commission and the one that we sent to the Planning Commission from city staff. After that was reviewed by the city attorney.
Okay. Dennis?
And I was going to say, and Councilmember Bayer-Kohler, I know you don't like things hitting your desk at the last minute, but the recommendation from Planning Commission has caused further review of this particular situation. Our local and state ordinances and statutes defining practical difficulties, but also a strong look at a federal law, civil rights law regarding equal and fair treatment of religious institutions as any other user occupier of that property. Based upon a review of the Arlupa law, I think there is a potential for subsequent lawsuit if this variance is denied, or even if it's, well, I don't think it's even required, because if you're treating a religious organization, their use of that property different than you're treating any other non-religious entity. If I bought that property and relocated my professional business, I would only need to provide 5 parking spaces. If it's used as a public gathering spot as a library, we only need 5 or 6 spaces for a library. We need 6 for a museum. But because it's being used as a church where they kneel and don't use chairs, we need 32 spaces. So as applied, the federal law is treating that religious use differently than a non-religious use. But if you do require a variance hearing, if you address the variance, I think the variance needs to be granted because there are practical difficulties in squeezing 32 parking spaces into that space. And those practical difficulties were not created by these owners, these users. That existed when they bought the property.
In addressing your situation, I did some research on this, and I checked different cities, and Faribault, Minneapolis, Hutchinson, Waseca, they have specific rules for places of worship. And their requirements are even tougher than ours. A lot of them, they require 1 parking stall for every 4 seats in the place of worship. Now, I can't believe that all those cities are violating the federal law regarding discrimination. Second of all, I know a number of years ago, I was chairman of the building committee for Good Shepherd Lutheran Church. And we added a new sanctuary addition. And we were told, you determine how many can sit in the sanctuary, and this is how many parking stalls you're required to have. Now, we didn't claim you were discriminating against Lutherans at that point, and those were the rules, and it's the rules in other cities, and I can't believe that those other cities are discriminating against certain religious groups. I don't think that's happening. If they are, then they better all change their ordinances, because that's the way their ordinances read. And you have different requirements for different entities, school districts or schools, elementary schools, high schools, commercial places of business. I mean, there are different bowling alleys, there are different requirements for parking for different types of entities, and they make sense because certain entities have more customers and need more parking stalls.
And here's how that further argument goes. Holy Redeemer Catholic Church is required 0 because of a separate zoning district.
But they were grandfathered in a long time ago. And I mean, you can't say we did something wrong 50, 60 years ago, and so we're going to keep doing it wrong. If they had to build today, I think they'd have to have a certain number of building or parking stalls for that. The idea is this. They have the rule, and our rule is 1 for 5. Every 5 people in that worship area, there should be 1 stall. And the idea is if there's not enough parking stalls, those people have no choice but to park out in the streets. And that affects the adjoining landowners. And I don't think we want that to happen. We want to make sure that if you have a business or you have an entity, you have adequate parking so that your business or your entity does not infringe on the rights of adjoining property owners. Now, I noticed that there's 4 houses next to the place where they're planning to build. I mean, I'm not sure what day of worship they have, but on their day of worship, are there going to be a lot of cars out in the streets, and they're going to take away from the parking of the adjoining landowners, the house owners, residential owners? So let me just take a drink here, and I got a few more things to say. The state law is this. The applicant has to prove, it's not on us to prove, it's on the applicant to prove that they meet these practical difficulties test. And there are 3 parts to it, 3 factors. And these 3 factors are this. The property owner proposes to use the property in a reasonable manner, not permitted by the zoning ordinance. The plight of the owner is due to circumstances unique to the property, not created by the landowner. And the variance, if granted, will not alter the essential character of the locality. So it's on the burden of, the burden is on the applicant to prove that they meet that test, not on the city to show that they don't meet that test. And my concern is this. For one thing, we need to know what is the size of the room that they're going to worship in and how many people are going to be in there. And that it determines the number of parking spots that should be there. In this particular case, I assume that this mosque wants to build in numbers. They want to grow. And if they grow in numbers and even have even more members, are they going to have adequate parking then? Are we going to put a limit on how many can occupy that mosque during worship? Because if it exceeds a certain number, then it changes the parking requirements. So I think those are all things that need to be considered. What effect does it have on the neighborhood? They really don't have any real area to grow. They're landlocked somewhat. There is a parcel nearby. They could maybe buy the vacant parcel and use that for parking. But I think those are things that they should look at. And they should be looking at the future and saying, is this really the best location for our mosque? Or is there a better location that has more room for expansion and has more parking that we need at this particular time? So I think those are things, and it would be my position that they have not met the 3-factor test and that the variance should be denied. So.
Okay. Other questions or other points of view? Greg?
I have a question out to the Planning Commission on the recommendation to deny based on safety. Was that safety factor? Was that because of the pedestrians on-street parking?
Yes.
Okay. So looking at and I appreciate Mr. Barracoler's research into this and his position on it, and and also input that I've received from other community members. And looking at this in the aerial view, there's a number of areas that we do have on-street parking, and I know that it's not typical and normal when we plan a development and there's a structure put in with an intent purpose that has parking requirements. Now we're using an existing building, changing the use that the previous use that was in compliance with parking and the new proposed use is putting it out. But looking at the adjacent streets not occupied by residences, so only the areas along 10th Street, and if you open up, Sheila, can you put Google Earth up? Because unless we've got a bigger exploded view, but going from about 20 feet south of the Wilmer Poultry, which is your last dot there, and following to the south along 10th, along that side, there's sidewalk that goes all the way down to just prior to the property line on the first resident, allowing 22 feet linear, which is the same as our Main Street parking stalls. I believe we could get 18 or 21. I don't remember exactly what the number is along that side of the street. And there is sidewalk that services that, so the people would not have to be on the street. The other side of the street, I think it would be probably not real safe to have parking on both sides through that radius, but if you stop about at the start of the Hess Concrete property and go south and basically go till you're just about at the driveway of the first residence on the opposite side, so not obstructing their ingress, egress into their driveway or backing in and out, I think you can get another 22 parking spots. Add that to the ones that are there, then I think we're over the deal. But there's a couple of needs that have to be met. That east side of the street would need a sidewalk to keep the pedestrians off the street. It would have to be done fairly quickly. And then the other part of that is that someone would need to be responsible for removing the snow so that that sidewalk was actually used. To me, that's, and I believe that it's only a fool that doesn't follow his counsel's recommendation. Otherwise, we wouldn't hire lawyers. So I usually get my medical advice from a doctor and my legal advice from our attorney. And so based on that and the other issues that come to play, I think that maybe the cart did get a little bit in front of the horse here, but I also understand that the time that's been spent with the Islamic Society trying to find a new location for their mosque, and I appreciate that. And that to me would be one solution that we would all have to participate in. It's a little bit unusual, but I think it still would be reasonable to make that move. It would take some commitment by the city. It would take some commitment by the society to agree to remove the snow, because I don't think it would go on to the property owners and the city wouldn't do it. But that would be one option that could help to solve the problem, and I think it helps to address what the Planning Commission, I believe, so accurately said, that I think having pedestrian traffic in that area on the street to move back and forth to the mosque is probably asking for trouble.
And on that note, Craig, I know some of the other concerns are, and I have a property adjacent to this, is parking. We may have to do some signage. If
Yep.
I read Dennis's stuff, and I understand what you're at. As Sheila pulls that up, there are trucks that go in and out of there. Case point, I have trucks that go in and out of there. When Lee's Taekwondo was in there, there was times we'd come back, my guys would come back to my shop. We could not get in there because the cars had parked us.
Sure, yep.
And there's semis, I have semis that come in and out. So on top of what you're saying is there needs to be signage to pull those cars away from that entrance to those. There's commercial shops. You getting close, Sheila?
And Jim, and using that exact scenario, because when I talked to one of the property owners there adjacent to it, and the same issue, truck traffic, ingress, egress, and I pulled 30 feet from those approaches, that it's a no parking zone.
Yes.
And the same thing, there can't be any street parking in the vicinity of what the former upholstery shop, which is now a cabinet shop, and the mosque. There couldn't be any parking in front there and on the opposite side of the street to allow for the full swing of semis, because you've got a 33-foot street and then a 30-foot.
You're past it, Sheila.
Past it.
So if you've got a full-length semi, you're going to need to get in and out of there with that. So you can't have any parking on the street there at all.
No, because where that entrance is, I know I pull a 36-foot fifth wheel.
Yep.
And if there's cars in the way, we cannot get in and out.
Right.
And,
Yep.
you know, and it's just that we have to have access.
Okay. What I talked about here when I did my piece is this is where the parking would start on the west side, and it would go follow along here, and it would end up down, stop again for intersection. This is actually the driveway into the turkey place, and then further down. Same thing here, Jim. It started about, I think it was right about here, you know, so just into the radius, but this is where it would end and then go south.
Yep.
Nothing up here.
No, and that's correct. Nothing, because across the road to the mosque is when Taekwondo parks in there. You can't get those trailers in and out. I know
Right.
Chuck has a commercial business too that you can't in a, you know, I don't care what worship is. I mean, everybody should worship
Doesn't
their own
matter.
religion, but
Yep.
we also can't stop the commerce that's going on.
Right. My point would even go so far as to measure these out, use the 22 feet
And make
of
parking
and
stalls.
actually mark the boxes.
I was going to make that suggestion and put the yellow lines to block the parking.
Yep.
So it's laid out where it is, and I think that would be a good.
And I think a crosswalk right in this area, going from this side to that side, an actual crosswalk, and then a sidewalk all the way down where we're gridding out the parking. So there's a sidewalk on both sides that they can use, but then there has to be an agreement that they're going to remove the snow from that sidewalk so they can actually use it.
Yes. So the owners are not taxed with that.
Right. Well, because there's no occupied property there. It's not like somebody's living there.
Farmland.
It's farmland, and I mean, it's our land too, and I don't want us to have to go move the snow, but I think we could definitely facilitate
No,
a sidewalk, and
And the sidewalk isn't going to benefit Mr. Hess, so when we do the sidewalk, not to hit him with an
it has to
assessment.
be on us. Yep.
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 So he's not hit with the assessment or have to worry about that sidewalk.
Okay, very good discussion.
Well, I have a couple questions here. So if we don't enforce the parking requirements here, where do we enforce them? Does any organization or business have the right to come in here and say, I really don't have enough parking spots on my property, so just it's all going to be taken care of in the street. They can go up and down the street, and there'll be plenty of parking for everyone. I mean, is that where we're heading, that we're not going to enforce? We might as well get rid of all the parking requirements if that's where we're headed. Because, you know, if we don't enforce it here, when do we enforce it?
When we
Let me just finish my points here. Number two, by the way, I'm a licensed attorney too, so I have some legal training, and you know, some people think I give good advice too. So,
do you do your own surgery?
Go ahead,
but
Glenn.
the third thing is, I feel like people are trying to do a favor for this group, and that's fine. But are we really doing them a favor? I mean, if this building is really not going to meet their long-term needs, at this point they have a contract for deed. I don't know if they can get out of it or not. But wouldn't it make more sense in the long term for them to find a parcel of land and a building or whatever that better meets their needs, not only today, but long into the future? If they buy this property and start operating as a mosque and then decide to expand later, you know, then they're going to have to try and sell the property, and that could be a hardship on them too.
Glenn,
So-
can we tell our families, young families, they got to buy a bigger house because their families are going to grow?
I'm just saying. Sometimes we act like we're doing them a favor when we may not be doing them a favor, and maybe this is not the right parcel for them. Maybe there's a better parcel.
that's
out there.
their decision, not
and I
ours.
agree with that. But I'm just saying, my point is this: that maybe we're not doing them a favor by trying to bend the rules to make this work. Maybe it deserves a look at the situation, and maybe there's a better location that would better suit their needs. And sometimes that's the way you help people. And if I were doing that with my children or friends or neighbors, I would give them advice too, is look at your long-term needs and see, is this going to meet your long-term needs? And so I want to help them too, but I want to be fair to everyone out there.
Okay, I'm going to
And,
stop
and,
you
and,
there.
and let me just make the motion then. I would make a motion to approve the Planning Commission recommendation to deny the variance request based on the fact that the applicants have not met the three-factor test that is required to show that there are practical difficulties in complying with the ordinance.
Motion by Glenn to deny the variance request for parking. Is there a second to that motion? I'll ask that two more times. Is there a second to that motion? Is there a second to that motion? That motion does die for lack of a second. I'd entertain an alternate motion.
I believe we don't need a motion, as Dennis Simpson pointed out, that with the federal law, that there is no motion, there should never been a variance applied for according to the law as it was read. And at this point, we should work on compromising, figure out a parking in the parking situation to make it work, because I have looked into this too, and I believe that we're opening up a lawsuit if we make a motion.
David?
Mr. Mayor, I respectfully disagree with that approach. I think if we do nothing, we have the effect of denying the variance. We have attorney's opinion. I'm not an attorney. It's even worse. I've taught law classes. That may be even worse. But
Hated a holiday, yeah.
I'm not sure. Let me say it this way. I think the bigger legal issue for us is not the scenario you talk about, Dennis, under the federal law. It is the state language, which directly governs variance law about the undue hardship. That's what we used to call it. Now it's a different language, I see.
Difficulty.
Practical difficulties.
The practical difficulties. I'm persuaded by that. I think we do need to grant the variance. I also think I agree with everything that's been said about the practicalities of the marking, the signage, the other things that mitigate the traffic concerns as much as possible. On that basis, I'll be voting for a motion. Well, I'll make the motion. I'll move that we grant the request for the parking variance.
Motion by David. Is there a second?
I'll second it.
Seconded by Craig.
Mr.
Discussion
Mayor, I'd
on
like to
that
make
motion.
I'd like to make one point on this, and if I was a resident owning in any one of these homes, and I decided that every Sunday and every Thursday and every Monday I was going to have a football party during the NFL season, and I had enough attendees, there'd be no law against my attendees parking on those streets exactly where we've talked about marking this up. So for a point of practicality, I want to make that point, that is a part of the public roadway that is usable for that. It may not fit our rule about business and the ordinance about business parking, but in the practical purpose of it, the physical obstruction of a vehicle can legally be there at any point in time.
Other discussion on the motion?
With your motion,
Jim,
Dave,
and
can
then
we
Steve.
add into the motion just installing the parking spots on the street? So we lay that out and get the parking signage and stuff in that motion? So then it alleviates the cars in front of the owners?
Sure.
Mr. Mayor? I'm sorry, go ahead, David.
I'm happy to do that, Jim, if Dennis, you're satisfied that that's legally consistent with the form of a variance.
That's fine.
Okay, so I would accept that as a friendly amendment. Kyle, do you have the language? Yes. Or we can pin that down, okay.
Read the tape.
And I just wanted to add
Okay,
a response
so
to
that's-
Mr. Bayer-Kohler.
Just stop for a second. You offered that as a correction to your motion. Do you accept that
I do.
corrected language?
I do.
So it's okay with the maker and seconder of the motion. Okay, now, other discussion on that motion.
The question had come up, do we ever grant parking variances to other locations? And the answer is yes, Mr. Bayer-Kohler, quite frequently. Lyon County Government Center, we granted them a variance. They have 43 less requirements than our ordinance requires. The new Cruise dealership, they have less than 1/2 of the required ordinance parking spots. Avera Marshall has 36 less than required by our ordinance. The second dealership out at Cruise has less than half as required. 300 North Highway 59, which is a car family limited partnership, they have only 1/2 of what our ordinance requires. So yes, it is quite common to grant parking variances. We are not plowing new ground with this. This is quite common to occur.
Other discussion on the motion?
You know, again, there's a practicality test here, and the question is, have the applicants met that practicality test or not? And I feel they have not. And I really question whether the city of Minneapolis, Waseca, Faribault, Hutchinson are in violation of federal discrimination laws when they require in their zoning ordinances that places of worship have so many off-street parking slots based on the number of people that would fit in their worship area. I mean, I can't believe that all those cities are in violation of federal laws. If you're saying, if you take that position that any ordinance that affects a religious organization violates some federal discrimination law, I think that's going too far.
Ask St. Anthony, Minnesota, ask Plymouth, Minnesota. Each are down $1 million in fighting that federal law.
Okay.
By denying
And I don't know the
opportunity.
particular facts of that case, but I mean,
I'd
there is
prefer
a
not to
difference
get
between
into it.
discriminating against a certain entity and not. And this is a common sense approach in saying, based on the number of people that worship there, we should have so many off-street parking places. And that's not discrimination. And just because it's a religious organization doesn't mean we can't do anything with them without being accused of discrimination.
And,
I think
that
that's going
position
too
has
far.
been rejected by the council. They have had a motion to grant the variance, which does apply local and state ordinance over federal law.
Okay, other
That's what the
discussion
motion
on the
is.
motion. Steve?
My one comment goes to the compromise of what we've done. You know, I think that there is potential, if the parking is not managed right, to impede both the 4 houses around there and the businesses going through that driveway, and we've addressed that. As far as precedents, you know, I too, Glenn, am Lutheran. I go to First Lutheran, and I can guarantee you we park on the street. There's just not enough room in our parking lot, and we park on the street. In fact, every church that I go to, except for yours, and I think that's a logistical thing, you can't park on Highway 23 and you can't park on Highway 19.
But I think your church, First Lutheran and others, have been grandfathered in. I think when they were built, I don't think they had the parking requirements that we now have. And so back then, when they built their facilities or worship facilities, they may not have been in violation of an ordinance, but maybe now they are.
No.
And so
You know,
I think we have different
Sure.
opinions on this, and I respect yours, and I hope you respect mine. And at this point, we don't even know what the proper amount of parking spots is, because it's based on square feet in the worship area.
Okay, other discussion on the motion.
Mr. Mayor, I have a
Okay.
question for the Islamic Society members here. What we've discussed tonight and the discussion about most crucial to me is the ability or the willingness to move the snow on the sidewalks where we do the parking designations. Are you folks okay with that? Okay. All right. I don't have anything else, Mr. Mayor.
Any other discussion on the motion?
Is this the complete wording of the motion, or?
No, it'll be clarified. Kyle had indicated
I have a
that.
question.
Yes.
Okay, on Main Street with their parking, we've seen how they park. They park partway out on the street. And they don't move their cars. They park in people's driveways. I mean, we're gonna have that problem. They're gonna park out in the middle of the street. We've seen that.
So my assumption, Glenn, is that there, in addition to the pavement marking, there'll be appropriate signage.
For no parking.
Yes.
I need after you decide, I need a clarification of the east side, how much no parking there should be. I would expect that we would want to have no parking through that gravel driveway, at least 20 to 30 feet on each side of that, but not in front of the houses on the east side. My interpretation is that we would still have public parking on the east side of the street. Blocking a driveway is illegal. And we did talk about parking on off-street areas that were private. Make sure that you don't do that. Make sure that your parishioners know that you don't park on private property. And don't block driveways. Because if you do, we would suggest that you be towed away. Just like any other place. Just like any other place.
Yeah, this falls under the assumption, I'm assuming, that
Right.
parking is correctly done. So
That's
that
correct.
If somebody's sitting halfway out
Right.
and they're not parked legally and they
Right.
get the complaint, then you're illegally parked and bear the consequences.
And
no
of
matter
course,
where you are.
that's an enforcement issue, and we have our
Yeah.
interim director of public safety here that would direct that enforcement.
And I believe pavement markings will help a lot of that because you have the box to park in now.
Yep.
Yep.
I mean,
And the yellow curbs on the restricted and the signage.
and on the restrict is on both sides because to get trailers in and out of there, you need to be able to.
Need to use that
That's a
whole
narrow
street.
road.
Both sides.
Okay, other discussion on the motion?
I think you always have to be careful with these variances because they go with the land. And so this is not something we're going to reverse in a year or two from now if it doesn't work out.
That use.
And use.
And use.
Right.
Change of use could change the need for
Right.
variance.
Right. But this can be there for a long period of time, this variance. Even if it doesn't turn out right, we're stuck with it.
We'll move to a vote on the motion on the table.
So is that the complete wording of the motion then?
That is not.
So we don't have a complete wording of what people are voting on?
As Kyle indicated before, he will.
But for now,
He'll put it in.
Mayor, could I ask Kyle just to read it out loud so we're all hearing the same thing?
Right, so, City Council believes that there's a need to act on the variance request. This follows with the parking, proper signage. I don't have the exact wording.
Well, could I maybe,
Yes, you
with
can-
your liberty, the recommendation that the variance be granted and that city staff develop appropriate parking regulations, limitations, and restrictions to address the safety concerns addressed here tonight. Is that agreeable to everyone?
And include marking that appropriately.
Markings on that list as well.
Okay. Other discussion on that motion, on the clarification?
was there anything in the motion about sidewalks? Putting in sidewalks? Or I've heard talk about that somebody might
I don't believe
put
that's
in
in the motion.
sidewalks.
Other discussion on the motion? If not, we'll move to a vote. Motion does pass. We'll note the one abstention. Well, then, agenda item number 18. Agenda item number 18 is consider the resolution authorizing the proper city officials to execute the grant agreement with Deed in the amount of $2 million for the construction of infrastructure in the Commerce Industrial Park. Glenn, do you have this? That's a, Dennis, do you have this?
No, I have this, Mayor. There has been much discussion about the granting of the $2 million infrastructure grant from Deed. We were awarded the grant quite some time ago. It has been drafted. We have an agreement on signature, agreement on terms. That was sent up to Deed for signature. They said it would take 2 weeks to sign and get it back to us, and that was about 3 weeks ago. So the recommendation from Deed is to approve it subject to any subsequent non-substantive changes that either the mayor or city attorney may recommend. I do not believe there will be any recommended changes. We've got an agreement to terms. They have signed, well, have submitted it for signature based upon the agreed upon terms. So it would be a recommendation to approve that. That would allow the city to receive the $2 million, and it's on a reimbursement grant. As expenses are incurred, they are paid and then reimbursed by Deed up to the $2 million on about a $5 million contract.
Any questions on the city attorney recommendation to enter into this resolution? If not, is there a motion?
I so move.
Motion by Craig, seconded by David. Discussion?
So if you decide that there are some minor changes that need to be made and they don't agree to them, they're not going to be made then.
We're getting a signed document back from them, and the changes that they have agreed to sign have been recommended by us and accepted. So that's why I say I'm not expecting any changes. They have agreed to the requested changes we have made.
So it's already a done deal. We know what the document's going to look like. There will not be any changes in the
Correct, yes. We have seen the agreement and have requested changes in the agreement, and the changed agreement has been sent for signature. They want to sign it first before it comes back to the city.
So they have already agreed to your changes?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, other discussion on the motion? If not, we'll move to a vote. Motion passes. Agenda item number 19. Agenda item 19 is the DNR Parks and Trail Legacy Project. We have a change order to consider. Actually, 2 change orders to consider, including the final change order and the acknowledgement of the final pay application. Any details to add to that, Glenn?
No details to add.
Are there any questions?
So the change order that's before us here, is this the common topsoil borrowed thing?
Uh-huh.
And
That was requested by the county within the county area. And maybe I'll give you just a quick summary. The total cost built to that project was about $383,000, of which the city was responsible for just under $50,000. There was 2 grants, one a DNR grant and the other a legacy grant, that we worked with the county, that they're the ones actually handling the financial part of the project. So it was quite a project, as you know, over the last several years to get this project accomplished. So of the $383,000, about $50,000 is city responsibility.
Other questions? If not, I'd entertain a motion on motion number 1, which is change order number 2 with D&G Excavating.
Move approval of change order number 2 for D&G.
Motion by John, is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by David. Discussion?
Glenn, so on this project, were there 3 change orders then, and 1 we've already approved then?
Yes.
And so we're just approving 2 more of them?
Yes.
Okay, so that's where you get the total of $13,959.62.
Yes.
Okay.
Other discussion on the motion? If not, we'll move to a vote. Motion passes, and then the second action would be the final change order, again with D&G Excavating. Marshall.
Move approval of the final change order.
Is there a second to that motion? Motion by John.
Second.
Seconded by Craig. Discussion? If not, we'll move to a vote. Motion passes, and just one additional comment on this project. This is the finaling out of multiple years of working cooperatively with the state of Minnesota, City of Lynn, Lyon County, for this connection all the way from the Red Baron Arena to Camden State Park. So it's a wonderful amenity, not only for the community and a wonderful partnership with legacy funding from the state of Minnesota that provided the funding for the vast majority of this project. So,
Mayor?
yes.
Wasn't the township involved in a minor way as well? Sort of?
Not
Perhaps.
Well, then we should
Through the
acknowledge that,
county,
too.
they might have been.
Thank you.
Very good. With that, we'll move to a vote. We did already. Then we'll move then to agenda item number 20. Agenda item number 20 is the bituminous chip sealing on various city streets. Once again, we have a change order, the final change order, and the final payment application to consider. Anything to add, Glenn?
Nothing to add.
I move approval.
Second.
Motion by Craig, seconded by John. Discussion?
I have a couple questions on this. The council originally budgeted or approved $145,000 for this. The original bid came in at $106,156. So when we started adding streets, why did we go over the $145,000? Why didn't we come in lower than the $145,000?
We did. MMU, in cooperative agreement with the city, asked us to include seal coating of their site. They will be paying $15,000 of this amount, and so the city is $13,000 under the amount that was authorized and allocated by the city. So we take that very seriously when the council says up to a dollar amount of $145,000. We made darn sure with our staff that they kept under that amount. So we will be paying $13,000 approximately, less than what was authorized and allocated.
That answers my question.
Thanks.
Good, thank you.
Better answer. Good answer.
When that happens, can you include that in the notes? So
We should.
it would have been nice to us reading
we
that. I know
should.
I asked Carla and Sheila about it, never did make it upstairs.
Okay.
And they did not have that answer either.
No, they wouldn't. They wouldn't know that.
But yes, include that next time and then,
We will.
thank you.
We'll try to. But then if you ask, we can give you the,
Well, because if the newspaper doesn't put it in, if citizens read this to them, you're $2,000 over budget.
right.
Other discussion on the motion, Steve?
That goes to my question, when we just authorize some overruns or fee adjustments. When we're making these plans, Glenn, typically, historically, you'll budget up a little bit to give for cost variances.
Correct.
So when we have that, and then we authorize another 7,500 on top of our cost variance budget, how does that happen?
It happens when we have a certain number of projects allocated, let's say in this case for seal coats, and then we have alternate ones in case the project comes in substantially under our estimated costs, so that we need to do all these. We just don't think that we'll have enough money to do all these. So we have a line that we kind of draw that says, these are the ones we'd like to do, and if it comes in under budget, we'd like to add some more of these. So in this case, let's say our budget was $145,000, comes in at $106,000, great prices from Dunnick's, and so we go, okay, how many more can we do within the budget that we have? And then we have that authorized before we award. So, yeah, we want to estimate high and build low. That's what we'd like to do. Otherwise, we have to cut projects off.
Other discussion on the motion? If not, we'll move to a vote. Motion passes. Agenda item number 21. Agenda item number 21 is Southwest Minnesota Regional Amateur Sports Ballpark Concessions Building. This is the acknowledgement of the final payment request with the contractor, Moe's Contracting, Inc. Anything to add to that, Glenn?
Nothing to
Any
add.
questions about this finaling out of this project?
Move to approve.
Motion by Steve,
Second.
seconded by Craig. Discussion?
The question I have, and it's for you, Carla, is this whole project still under budget?
Yes.
By quite a bit?
I'm not aware of that yet.
Okay.
But yes, it is still under budget.
Still under budget.
If Preston was here, I think he would answer that more, more completely, in that it's quite a bit under budget. In fact, there's one more.
Under budget, I do not know the number.
Right.
And that's
Other discussion or other
Under budget.
discussion? If not, we'll move to a vote. Motion passes. Agenda item number 22. Consider the approval of the amendments to the Personnel Policy Manual. I know this has been discussed by our Personnel Committee. I'll turn to you, Sheila.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. Our Personnel Committee reviewed and recommended approval of the proposed amendments on October 11th. Fortunately, Councilmember Meister was unable to be present at that meeting, so there were 2 council members present. Staff are recommending amendments to the policy manual for the training and travel policy and date amendments to Appendix B. I have attached a red line copy of the travel policy and Appendix B for your review and consideration. The date changes in Appendix B would be effective retroactive to October 1st, 2017. Originally, we had the Personnel Committee meeting scheduled to meet that particular date deadline, and unfortunately, we were unable to have a quorum, so that's the reason this is coming in after October 1st. No rate changes to that schedule are being proposed. We do have language changes proposed within the travel policy that serve to clarify for implementation purposes, and I'll just review those briefly, and you can ask any questions after that if you have any. For Section 11.4, which is the authorization for in and out of state travel, all employee travel, we're proposing today and proposing requires division director and city administrator approval. City council approval would be required for travel requiring airfare or non-budgeted out-of-state travel. This was language that the Personnel Committee is recommending. There are instances where training has been budgeted for that exceeds the 150-mile radius that is currently cited in the policy, so it is proposed that the reference to those miles be eliminated. In the next section, 11.8, this is a clarification of when an employee would be eligible to submit for meal expenses. 11.9, the language proposed would allow the city administrator to approve for a city employee to stay on site where a conference and hotel are co-located. In the past, that has been an issue where the conference has additional lodging requirements beyond the per diem amount, so the city administrator would be able to approve an additional per diem amount if they felt that was reasonable. Section 11.11 proposes language that encourages the employee to utilize the most cost-effective method of travel. Sometimes it isn't feasible or cost-effective for a city to utilize a city vehicle for travel. We do have a cost-benefit calculator spreadsheet that we use internally, and we would be assisting employees to determine what the lowest method of travel is for employees. Changes to the remaining sections clarify proper department to submit documentation to, and clarifies that no mileage reimbursement is paid to employees who receive vehicle allowance for local travel. Under the IRS rules, employees receiving an allowance are still eligible to receive mileage reimbursement for non-local travel. The language there isn't different, it just is clarified for implementation because there were questions from employees. If approved by the council, we would proceed with updating the cover page and the table of contents with the date of revision. Both staff and the personnel committee recommended approval of these changes.
Thank you, Sheila. Questions?
I have a couple questions here. You indicate that they have to take they should choose the lowest total cost option. And so
employees would be encouraged to do that. The city administrator would have leeway to make a determination if there was some other reason for not doing that.
So it's not that they should choose, it's that they're encouraged to use?
They're encouraged to do that and to consult. Kathy Lee has the spreadsheet on the cost-benefit analysis. So when the request for travel comes through a division director and the administrator, we would consult that spreadsheet to see what the most cost-effective method of travel is for that employee.
Okay. So if somebody from the city staff had to go down to Worthington for a meeting, they would notify you, we're going down there for a meeting, you run a cost analysis, and you tell them which is the low-cost option?
I'll give a for instance. Sometimes, for instance, if we're traveling a long distance, 3-hour trip to the Twin Cities, it may be more cost effective to use a rental vehicle if it's not an overnight trip than it is for the employee to use their own vehicle or even a city vehicle because it's a per day charge. So it depends on the nature of the trip, how long it is, as to what the most cost effective method would be. So we would work with employees, and over time, hopefully people would come to understand what our rates are related to the fleet vehicles versus rental vehicles, and we would be able to make those determinations with them.
I know my organization has a similar policy.
I noticed that the documentation shall be provided by the Human Resource Department instead of the Finance Department. That evidently that's a change,
This is handled as a payroll item. So Doreen Peterson is our human resource assistant that handles payroll. So all of the submissions, and that is for the vehicle allowances. That is not for all travel with the city. So that particular paragraph is for employees receiving a vehicle allowance, and that does go through our payroll department.
Okay, that's
so
kind
it is. She isn't a part of finance any longer. She used to be.
Okay, and that's kind of unusual because you'd normally think payroll would be part of finance instead of human resources.
Right.
Okay.
Any other questions? If not, you have the recommendation from the Personnel Committee.
I'll move the recommendation.
Second.
Motion by John, seconded by Steve. Discussion? If not, we'll move to a vote. Motion passes. This time I'm going to call for a 5-minute recess. 23, this would be to consider the application for a temporary on-sale liquor license for SMSU Foundation for an event December 8, 2017. Are there any questions about this?
Move to approve.
Motion by Steve.
Second.
Seconded by Jim. Discussion? If not, we'll move to a vote. Motion passes. Agenda item number 24 is the Commission Board Liaison Reports. My boards and commissions have not met since we last met. Craig?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The Library Board met last night. There's some of the amnesty program. They had Food for Late Books amnesty program. That was fairly successful. There's still some 400 items out, which seems like a large number, but when you look at the number of checkouts and the volume that goes through, it's really a pretty low number. So there's going to be another attempt there to bring things back in line. There's been a lighting upgrade done in some of the new areas where they've gone to high output LEDs and a large number of those, and that's been pretty successful. It was real good. There's some problems with some of the windows in the library. There was a lot of reuse of existing windows in the new expansion, and there's some warping of the frame. So there's one area there that there was probably a 1/4 inch gap in one of the windows. So there's a little bit of work going on there, some concerns. Greg, our maintenance person, has been working with Michelle and the staff there to get that moving. Otherwise, things are going pretty well. The Plum Creek agreement, Dennis, I think is just about ready to go through, right? You had a bunch of changes, and then there's some other changes I think that Jackson County had, and otherwise I think it's about ready to get signed. So that's been,
I think their hope is early January.
Right. Yeah. And it seems pretty positive. There's some new changeover on Plum Creek, and so we're hopeful that things are going to move forward there. So that's all I have for the Library Board. The Southwest Amateur Sports Commission met today to kind of go over some things. We were initially going to have a retreat and kind of a team building thing today. That got postponed to the 13th of December. So we'll be doing that. We did act on 2 new members. One is the member from Schwann's, Mr. Poff. Alan Poff is on. Today was his first meeting. And then we're offering up another new member. I apologize. I don't have her. I can't remember her name absolutely. So I apologize. I'm not going to say it here, and I didn't write it down and bring it with. But that's looking good. We've been going over some of the financial pieces, and part of our team building efforts on our retreat on the 13th of next month is going to be to focus on making sure that internally we're sustainable, that our efforts and inputs from the city through the hospitality tax is the food and beverage is really all that we have to need, that we want to make sure that we're managing the events, managing what we do there to both enhance the experience of the people coming in, especially from out of town, using the facility, obviously, to make it attractive and of good use with our local citizens, but then also to make sure that we full advantage the events going on there to help with the food and beverage sales in town, and then also to put heads in beds. So they're working good to make sure that they run multiple day tournaments, and there's a lot of excitement. Some of the tournaments coming in, they're drawing in schools like Breck for one of the tournaments. Now, if anybody's in the hockey business at all, bringing Breck to Marshall is huge. And so things are looking up. I think, a lot of people think that they'd like to see that moving faster. I think looking at it from the inside out, it's moving pretty well. And so that's all I have. The Merit Center meets on Thursday. The Merit Board, and we're getting some more activity there. There's been Jasmine's doing a really good job there. There's a lot of things starting to happen, and we actually have a representative from Union Pacific Railroad that I talked to on Monday morning is making kind of a circuit ride through southwest Minnesota, northwest Iowa. That's going to come out this week and spend an afternoon with Jasmine and I out at the Merit Center. And the efforts there is to build out our rail training capabilities, possibly bringing in a couple of tank cars, a high pressure and low pressure rail cars that we can use as training props, and building a more consistent curriculum on the site. So I think that's positive. I think having Jasmine there and having somebody hard and fast, there's been a little bit of growing pains with making sure everybody has their space and understands, and I really appreciate staff. Jim, I know that was a little bit you got sucked into right at the time that Rob left for his leave, and thank you. And I think it's going well. I think things are moving forward, and I'm kind of excited about it. So that's all I have.
Okay, very good. Steve?
Community Services Advisory Board did not meet, and EDA meets tomorrow.
Glenn?
I wasn't able to attend the Planning Commission meeting, but one of the items on their agenda, the variance for the mosque, was acted on tonight. I serve on both the Housing Commission and the Planning Commission, and I'm really impressed with the quality of people we have on those two commissions. They're dedicated, they're hardworking, they ask questions, they really take their jobs seriously, and I'm just glad to be there with them. And I don't vote, but like I say, I respect what they're doing. They take their job seriously, and I appreciate the work that they're doing.
Like Steve mentioned, the EDA meets tomorrow. Utilities Commission meets next Tuesday, and with Bill here, I won't make any comments about the Utility Commission, guys and gals.
And David?
The Airport Commission met last Tuesday the 7th. We reviewed first the 5-year capital improvement plan and its refinement, and look at the plans for the Glenn. I'll say this wrong. The resealing of the crosswind runway to be done next spring. Right. I will say the Airport Commission has lately been at full strength with I guess 3 new members, the first time in a very long time. So I appreciate the new energy and involvement from the community there.
Very good.
The Adult Community Center met. They approved the contract for food preparation. And then I got a tidbit of interesting information from them. They served over 10,000 individuals, not meals, but served 10,000 individuals there throughout the course of the year. And as we move into more baby boomers, the age of joining the community center is 70. Some of us still have kids in high school, but that's all right.
Elementary school.
As the baby boomers hit 70, there's going to be greater need for that facility. Marshall Area Transit meets Thursday, and I won't be able to attend, then I'll be gone.
Okay, thank you, Jim. We'll move then to agenda item number 25. Councilmember individual items, Craig?
Nothing, Mr. Mayor.
Steve?
I do have one thing. I think that I would suggest that we have Glenn look into the 4th Street right in front of West Side. I've had to go pick up my son a couple of times, and we are waiting for somebody to get killed there. I'm just guaranteeing it. Some poor kid is going to get killed, so I think we need to work with Scott and figure out, since the school issue got voted down, the traffic there is absolutely ridiculous. People are using it to pick up their kids, and it's clogged there. Talk about parking. And yet people are still sailing through there. We almost got clipped today with somebody just driving through, not picking up a kid. It's dangerous for kids. It's dangerous for parents picking them up. It's just dangerous.
Maybe a comment there. That intersection is included in our potential safe routes to school plan with radar indicated speeds and flashing crosswalk signals. Okay, and that's a couple of things that we're doing at that intersection. So if there's any other suggestions, we'd like to see them. That'll be 2022 or earlier. So 2019 to 2022, depending upon funding.
So I'd ask for, it's an excellent point, a staff discussion between Public Works and Public Safety would be to address that safety concern.
That's scary.
Glenn?
I have nothing.
John?
Just that with completion of the Municipal Building Committee, just want to thank all of the members that took part in that. We had we had the group that was appointed by the council, and as well we had a couple of other contributors to the various meetings, and really all the input was appreciated, and all the work by all the people that were on the committee was greatly appreciated, and thanks to Councilman Sturrock and Councilman Bierkohler for taking part in that discussion as well.
And also thank you, John, for your leadership in chairing that group. Good. David?
Nothing tonight.
And Jim?
I have something I've been pondering, this. As we know, last Tuesday, Relco announced that they are doing their hatchery in Laverne. I've had a lot of calls from private business folks. I myself run a small business, and that was to us, it happens. It was a shock. It kind of took the wind out of our sails because we make our business by the growth of our community. And I want to commend the EDA that worked on that, but that's something we as a city need to continue to work on to try to draw them in, because as small business people, if we don't have growth in those type of businesses, we eventually go away. And I had a lot of, like I said, I probably fielded 40 calls. Like I said, I myself run a small business, and it was kind of a hit. My business does travel outside of Marshall, so I have that advantage. Fortunately, we are doing a lot of work in Laverne now, which we picked up, and it has nothing to do with the hatchery, but I look at our car dealerships, I look at our small shops on Main Street. They can't pick up their crews and move them out. So as we go forward into forward with Relco, working well with some of the cities, that we need to try to draw them into Marshall. Water quality, we need to take a serious look at that, and if that is a serious issue, because we want to keep them in this area. And as a small business person, we need to grow that, or like I said, small businesses have a tough time.
Mr. Mayor, if I could add to that, and Jim, that's a great point, and I just want to say that I look at all of that expansion from a different angle based on the water quality piece, and I can tell you that piece is no advantage for Laverne, because they're facing the same issues that Marshall's facing when it comes to them being able to deliver any type of a salty discharge to the city. Marshall and Laverne are in the same boat. Marshall's actually positioned probably a little bit better, but their decisions weren't based on that part anyway.
Well, that's what was in the paper.
Well, that doesn't mean it's right.
Well, and whatever the issues are, is we need to work with them to draw them in. Again, as a small business person, and I'm not picking on the rest of you here, but a lot of you guys don't rely on, you do, but you have jobs that, I don't have a paycheck. I do not get a paycheck every week. I need to grow my business or I don't get paid. Plain and simple. And other business people pointed that out.
I think we need to talk to EDA or figure out, do a ipso facto or post hoc analysis to figure out what led them to Laverne versus Marshall, and then correct it if we can.
And I've had a number of discussions with the leadership of Relco and True Shrimp, and it's one step. So the next step is going to be even more. So that next step will be the expansion of Marshall.
Hopefully.
And we need to work on, making that grow if there are issues to resolve them. Because like I said, us small business people, we do not get a paycheck. We need to.
And the other thing is, it's always likely to have speculation and even misinformation.
And that's why, like Steve said, is to figure out so we know what's going on.
Exactly.
And there's a lot of good stuff coming from Relco, and there's a lot of good stuff from other growth too, don't get me wrong, but it was just, that was the big one that was in the paper.
Right.
And I don't believe it's the big fish. I got to agree with you. There's more coming here. I believe it a lot of opportunity there, but we need to make sure we position our staff, our EDA, that we are positioned to grab it. Because as a business owner, to be frank with you, a business owner is going to build his business where it's most cost effective, least regulations, and they're going to make the most money. That's called capitalism, plain and simple.
Right. So, but the only thing I'd add, and I agree with everything you're saying, but as we, sometimes misinformation, kind of runs amok, and there are some people that kind of run with misinformation. So,
Well, I agree.
so I think, getting all the right information, and as leaders of the community,
Yep, and
it's
then
really on us to get that information out.
And I agree with you 100% on that.
Okay. Anything else, Jim?
No.
Agenda item number 26. Staff report. Sheila, I believe this will be quite a report for you. I mean, this is your last one.
We'll see if we can get through this. City staff are very excited for the new administrator's first day on Thursday. Sharon's orientation schedule has been distributed, and Kathy Lee will continue to schedule more appointments for her as we head into the first part of December. Just a reminder that next week City Hall will be closed on Thursday and Friday in observance of Thanksgiving. And then lastly, for those of you counting down with me, today is the final meeting with you as interim administrator, and I just want to say thank you to each of you for your support and your patience with me through this. I also wanted an opportunity to say thank you to all of the employees who have surrounded me this past 4.5 months with support and advice and encouragement. We have amazing employees working for the city, and I'm very grateful for them. I will continue to work very closely with Sharon to ensure a very smooth transition of information and projects and ensure that the items that we have in progress right now with committees are followed through on. There are a number of things that need to be carried through. So I will admit I'm very much looking forward to going back to my HR duties. I learned a lot, and I'm grateful for the opportunity to serve the city. And just wanted to thank you again for giving me the opportunity.
Thank you, Sheila. And
fantastic job.
Yes, we're truly blessed and fortunate to have you in our service. So thank you. Would you join me in thanking her? Len?
So how do you follow that then? If you haven't been out to the new Commerce Industrial Park, do a little swing out there just to see what's going on. It's the most intensive project that we've had since I've been here. Midwest Contracting has been doing a great job in trying to move material, and they're moving it, and they're getting compaction in what they're doing. And the water table in some locations is right under the black dirt. So they have a lot of issues that they're dealing with, but not complaining a bit. Also, Keekly Underground has got several crews working out there. They intend to be done with all the underground by next week, sometime next week. And that was something that we thought would take, 3 months minimum. But they brought in the types of crews that was necessary to do the work. They're really good contractors to work with. So I want to mention that. Get out there. If you want an extra tour, just stop at the office and we'll run out there with you as well. Fern USA, the furniture mart that's coming into Kmart, will be in next week to discuss process and in their location for early next year. We also have been working with Runnings on the redevelopment of the old Runnings building out by the liquor store. So those we would hope to see fruition soon. I've also contacted both the mall owner and James Carr for the availability of interim City Hall if necessary, just making sure that they are aware of the possibilities and are going to be giving us a proposal for each of their sites after we answer questions and things. So we will be bringing back to next meeting's agenda the agreement with Engen, and I know you're working on this, but I would suggest that you try to identify a new City Hall committee so that we can work with that with the architect on the development of proposals for phase 1 of the project. So that's lots going on. We're starting to develop our projects for next year. We're talking about Saratoga Street reconstruction. That's a real big issue for us. And it may be 2018 or 2019, depending upon MnDOT's input. We'll be meeting with MnDOT within the next couple of weeks for that coordination of construction. Being next year, of course, we've got the Lion Street Trunk Highway 23 project scheduled. They have temporarily put on hold the County Road 7 Trunk Highway 23 project, but that's another one that could go forward, but they're taking care of some design issues with that. And there will be a detour at some point in time coming down Main Street that we didn't want to interfere with our project as well. So lots of other small projects, but those are the really major ones that we'll have substantial discussion over the next few months. That's all.
Thank you, Glenn.
Yep.
Dennis?
Nothing.
Okay. We'll move then to agenda item number 28. Or 29, excuse me, which is the pending agenda items. Any questions about the pending agenda items? If not, agenda item number 30 is the information items, including the building permits. Agenda item number 31, the upcoming meetings. Which brings us to agenda item number 32. Consider adjourning this meeting.
So moved.
Motion by David, seconded by Craig to adjourn. Discussion?
One question, Mr. Mayor. When it was council member individual items, you didn't say anything. Did you have anything?
No, I don't
Okay.
believe I do this
Nice
evening.
catch.
So, but thank you for reminding me.
You're welcome.
Yes, right. So, very good.
Move to adjourn.
Motion by
Second.
It's already been done.
We want to do it twice, man.
We're so emphatic.
So we'll move to a vote.
Killing me. Otherwise, I'm voting no.
We are adjourned. We'll move immediately then into our
Oh,
budget
you should
meeting.
see him when I
Don't
get
leave.